Because of my family's long-standing tradition of favoring firstborns, I ended up without a home, so I changed my last name. I'm a 26-year-old man, and for the majority of my life, I felt like nothing more than an afterthought in my own household. My older sister, Lucy, was the golden child, the eldest, the source of pride, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I was the extra, the one expected to step aside, sacrifice, and never question why things were the way they were. It started when I was young. Birthdays were the first sign. Lucy's were extravagant events: balloons, lavish cakes, expensive gifts. Mine, they were much simpler, small gatherings with modest presents. Sometimes my birthday wasn't even its own occasion, but was merged with another family event. No one ever outright said that Lucy mattered more, but over time, the message became painfully clear. Education was another example. Lucy attended a top-tier private school with the best teachers, tutors, and extracurriculars money could buy. I, on the other hand, went to public school and had to navigate everything by myself. When she turned 16, my parents handed her the keys to a brand new car. 2 years later, when I hit the same milestone, I was told to start saving if I wanted to buy a used one. Whenever I questioned why I was treated differently, the response was always the same. Lucy is the firstborn. She has more responsibilities, so she deserves more. That was the unspoken rule in our family, a tradition passed down for generations. The eldest child was given everything because they were expected to carry the family legacy forward. As for the younger siblings, we were just there. For a while, I convinced myself that maybe I was being selfish, that I should just be grateful for what I had. So I kept quiet, worked hard, and avoided asking for much. But then when I turned 18, reality hit me like a freight train. Lucy got accepted into an elite university, and my parents were overjoyed. They paid for her tuition, bought everything she needed, and even sent her a generous allowance every month. A week later, I sat down with them, ready to discuss my own plans for college, hoping they would offer me the same support. Instead, they handed me a stack of job listings and said, "You're an adult now. It's time to start contributing." Just like that, I was on my own. Before I could even process their decision, they hit me with another condition: rent. If I wanted to continue living in the house, I had to start paying my share. Meanwhile, Lucy, who lived in a fully furnished apartment funded by them, never had to worry about a thing. There wasn't even time for me to be angry. I was too busy working two jobs just to afford rent, food, and community college tuition. All while my sister spent her college years partying without a care in the world. My nights were spent pulling late shifts at a gas station, and my mornings were filled with classes. Every penny I earned went toward surviving. As for my parents, they didn't care. In fact, they had the audacity to tell me I should feel honored to lighten their financial burden. Lucy, of course, found my struggles amusing. During holiday breaks, she would come home and make sarcastic remarks about how exhausted I looked, telling me I should just ask mom and dad for help, like she did, ignoring the fact that I had already tried and that she knew exactly how unfair it all was. The final breaking point came when I was 20. After years of relentless effort, I had finally saved enough to move out and transfer to a better college. I felt hopeful, like I was finally freeing myself from the chains that held me back. But then, my parents called for a family meeting. Lucy had decided to pursue graduate school, and my parents were already financially drained. Paying for her undergraduate degree had maxed out their savings, and they had even taken out loans in their own names to keep her afloat. Now, with their finances stretched thin, they turned to me. They expected me to take out loans in my name, so Lucy wouldn't have to. When I refused, they were furious. They called me selfish, ungrateful, and a disgrace to the family. Lucy is working towards something great, they argued. You should be happy to support her. That was it for me. The next morning, I withdrew every cent I had, packed my bags, and left. No warnings, no goodbyes. I changed my number, deleted all my social media accounts, and disappeared from their lives completely. The first thing I did was legally change my last name. For the first time ever, I felt free. Free from their obligations, their expectations, their constant belittling. The first few years were difficult. I struggled, had to start over from nothing, but at least I was in control of my own life. No more comparisons to Lucy. No more being treated like I didn't matter. I worked hard, graduated, got a job, and built a life where I was finally my own person. For 6 years, I had peace. Then last week, everything came crashing back. I was at work when I saw an email pop up with the subject line, "I need your help." It was from Lucy. Over the years, I had occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that Lucy's business wasn't doing as well as she claimed. Investors were pulling out, she was losing money fast, and creditors were closing in. At first, she tried to keep up appearances, pretending everything was fine. But when even our parents could no longer finance her failures, her facade crumbled. She was desperate, and for the first time ever, she needed me. For 6 years, I had heard nothing from Lucy or my parents. No emails, no calls, not even a single text. It was like I had never existed to them, which was exactly what I had wanted. I had built a life without their influence, free from their selfish demands. And then, out of nowhere, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple: "I need your help." Her message was long, too long. She rambled on about how everything had fallen apart, how her business had collapsed, how she was drowning in debt, and how the bank was coming after her. She was on the verge of losing everything. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe a scam. Maybe she had meant to send it to someone else. But then I noticed details, memories from our childhood, things only she would know. And right at the very end, she revealed the real reason she had reached out. Our parents were struggling too. She didn't explain how or why, just that they were really having a hard time. And since my life was stable now, it was my turn to step up. I read the email once, then again, and a third time before finally shutting my laptop and stepping away. For hours, I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity eventually got the best of me. So, like anyone in my position, I decided to dig deeper. It didn't take long to uncover the truth about what had really happened. Lucy's business had been unstable for years, barely managing to survive through risky financial moves and overpromising investors. At first, she experienced some success, but behind the scenes, cracks had been forming: unpaid debts, failed contracts, and mounting lawsuits. Eventually, it all collapsed, leading to news articles, forum discussions, and even a few media reports exposing her financial mismanagement and fraudulent dealings. Apparently, she had been running some type of investment firm that guaranteed high returns. The usual scheme, filled with flashy marketing, designer suits, and exaggerated confidence. But in the end, the whole operation turned out to be a scam. Clients lost money, lawsuits piled up, and her company was forced to shut down, leaving her with nothing. As for my parents, they had been her financial backers from the beginning. For years, they poured their savings into her ventures, convinced that their beloved firstborn was destined for greatness. But when everything fell apart, so did their finances. The irony was almost comical. My entire life, I had been told I wasn't worth investing in, that Lucy was the future, that every sacrifice was necessary to support her success. And now they were left with nothing, expecting me to clean up their mess. I deleted the email. The next day, my phone started buzzing, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, and another. Then came the text: "We need to talk. Please pick up." It was my mother. I hadn't heard her voice in years, but the moment I played the voicemail, I recognized the tone, that same sweet but manipulative way she always spoke whenever she needed something. She didn't mention the past. She didn't ask how I had been. She skipped straight to, "We're still family." I stopped listening after that. For the next week, the messages kept coming. Different numbers, different guilt-tripping tactics. Lucy sent another email, shorter this time but laced with anger. She accused me of abandoning them, of turning my back on my family when they needed me the most. I ignored it. Then my parents sent their version of an apology. They admitted they had made mistakes, that they could have treated me better. But they never actually said sorry. Instead, they circled back to the same tired argument. Family sticks together. I finally responded with one sentence: "I am not your backup plan." The following day, another email arrived. This time, an ultimatum. If I truly cared about my family, I would come home and help. If I didn't, then they would know where I stood. That made things simple. I cut off every way they had to reach me: emails, phone numbers, even mutual acquaintances who tried to guilt trip me into talking to them. Of course, it wasn't as easy as pressing a button. Some relatives tried reaching out in person. Others used different numbers or fake accounts, but I refused to budge. My boundaries were firm. I thought that was the end of it. Then, 3 days later, there was a knock at my door. The moment I opened it, I knew things had gone from bad to worse. Lucy stood outside. The sister I remembered was gone. The polished, confident woman who once flaunted her wealth was now barely holding herself together. Her once expensive clothes were wrinkled and disheveled. Dark circles lined her eyes. Her hair was unkempt. And for the first time in her life, she looked like someone who had been completely shattered by reality. She took a step forward, but I didn't move. At first, she tried to act like this was just another conversation, like we were two siblings catching up after years apart. But her voice wavered. She wasn't here for a reunion. She was desperate. She started speaking quickly, rattling off everything that had gone wrong, how bad things had gotten, how our parents were struggling, how she had no one else to turn to. She told me I was the only one who could fix this. It wasn't even a request, it was a demand. I said nothing. I didn't invite her in. That's when the guilt tripping started. She talked about how our parents were barely getting by, how they had sacrificed everything for both of us, not just her, how family sticks together, how I was making things harder than they needed to be. I still didn't react. Then her tone shifted. The pleading stopped. Frustration took over. Her expression twisted as if she couldn't believe I wasn't immediately giving in, as if I was the one being unreasonable. She called me selfish, accused me of turning my back on my own family, said my grudge had gone on long enough. I finally responded. I reminded her of everything, how our parents had never once treated me as an equal, how they had thrown me out at 18 with nothing while she had been handed everything on a silver platter, how I had spent years struggling just to survive while she lived in comfort. Her response, a shrug. That's just how things were. You should have understood that. That was all she had to say. No regret, no apology, just the same entitled mindset she had always had, that I was supposed to accept being treated as less because that was simply how it was. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel resentment, I just felt done. I told her she needed to leave. That's when the meltdown began. She lashed out, ranting that I would regret this, that I was making a terrible mistake, that I had let other people turn me against my own family, that I was just bitter because she had always been more successful. That last part almost made me laugh. I let her vent. I let her throw every insult she could think of. Then I told her something I should have said years ago. The past? It didn't matter anymore. Whatever relationship we had as kids, whatever bond she thought we shared, it had ended the moment I walked away. I was no longer their safety net. I owed her nothing. Her face turned red. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off. An hour later, I received one final email from my parents. It was brief. They were deeply disappointed in me. I blocked them. I thought that was the end of it. Then the next day, a mutual acquaintance reached out. Apparently, Lucy and my parents weren't finished with me yet. They had come up with a new plan to drag me back in, and it was worse than I could have imagined. It started with a single message. A former acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out with a warning. They told me to be careful because my family was planning something drastic. I asked what they meant, and their answer sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, I began to notice a pattern. Messages from distant family members filled with vague inquiries about my financial situation. Some hinted that I had done well for myself, while others outright asked if I had come into a fortune. Confused, I started digging for answers, and that's when I uncovered the lie Lucy and my parents had been spreading. They had told everyone that I was secretly wealthy, hoarding money while they struggled. When I publicly addressed the situation, I made one thing very clear. Whatever financial success I had achieved was through my own hard work, not something handed to me. And I didn't owe them anything. But it wasn't just that they were saying I was financially stable. They were exaggerating to the point of absurdity, making it seem like I had struck gold. Some versions of their fabricated story claimed I had won the lottery. Others suggested I had received a massive inheritance from a distant relative. One of the most ridiculous rumors was that I had invested in cryptocurrency early on, and was now sitting on a fortune. No matter the variation of the story, the conclusion was always the same. I had abandoned my struggling family despite my supposed wealth. Lucy and my parents had spun a sob story, portraying themselves as victims, barely making ends meet, while I selfishly refused to help. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than empty gossip. But then, the flood of messages started. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. One by one, they came crawling out of the shadows. They weren't checking in to see how I had been. They weren't reaching out after years of silence to reconnect. They were demanding that I do the right thing. Some were subtle about it, casually asking how I was, how my job was going, and whether I had been blessed financially. Others were far more aggressive, outright accusing me of betraying my own family. One relative even sent me their bank details outright, asking for a small loan. At first, I didn't understand the sudden attention. Then I saw Lucy's social media. She had been posting cryptic messages about betrayal, preaching about how families should stick together and how money changes people. She had painted herself as the victim, the devoted older sister abandoned by a heartless sibling who had everything. My parents weren't much better. They had made a public Facebook post about how some children forget where they come from once they find success. The comments were filled with extended family and old acquaintances eating up their lies, offering sympathy and outrage on their behalf. That was it. I had enough. I called Lucy. The moment she answered, I demanded an explanation for why she was spreading lies about me. She didn't even attempt to deny it. Instead, with a smug tone, she simply said, "Well, maybe if you acted like family, we wouldn't have to tell people this." That was all I needed to hear. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. They wanted to manipulate me back into the role I had spent years escaping. The lesser sibling, the one who was expected to sacrifice for the family. They thought if they backed me into a corner, I would give in. I didn't. I told Lucy, "If you think I have money, then sue me for it. Otherwise, leave me alone." Then I hung up and started cutting people off. Anyone who messaged me to guilt trip me or demand that I help, blocked. I deleted old contacts, removed distant relatives from my social media, and shut down every possible way they could reach me. But I wasn't going to take any risks. A friend who had seen situations like this spiral out of control before warned me to be cautious. They advised me to watch out for identity theft attempts, fraudulent credit applications, and any suspicious financial activity in my name. At first, I thought they were being paranoid. Then, the letter arrived. It was a formal legal notice. Lucy and my parents were suing me. The claim? Unjust enrichment. Their argument was that because I had benefited from family resources as a child, food, shelter, basic necessities, I now owed them financial compensation for everything they had provided me. It was absurd, and I had no intention of letting them get away with it. A few days later, the official legal documents arrived. Lucy and my parents were serious about the lawsuit. Their claim, unjust enrichment. According to them, because I had once relied on family support, I was now obligated to repay them. They were demanding a significant amount of money, insisting that I wouldn't have been able to build a life for myself without their sacrifices. If it weren't so pathetic, it would have been laughable. I wasted no time. I took the lawsuit straight to a lawyer. The moment my attorney read through the documents, they shook their head. "This case has no legal standing," they said. It was a blatant cash grab, a desperate attempt to intimidate me into handing over money. But my lawyer advised me not to ignore it. Not because they had a real case, but because failing to respond could allow them to drag it out and cause unnecessary stress. So, we went on the offensive. A formal legal response was drafted, dismissing their claims entirely and warning that if they continued to pursue this nonsense, they could be held responsible for my legal fees. Then, something unexpected happened. I had kept everything quiet. No social media posts, no public drama. But somehow word got out. Distant relatives, old acquaintances, even people who had previously sided with Lucy and my parents found out about the lawsuit. And people did not take their side. The very same relatives who had been guilt-tripping me just weeks ago suddenly started turning against them. Some reached out to apologize for believing their lies. Others sent me screenshots of family group chats mocking the ridiculous lawsuit. Even people who had never shown interest in my life before were now reaching out, saying things like, "I can't believe they would do this to their own son." Then, Lucy made a huge mistake. She started wiping her social media clean. Every post about betrayal within the family disappeared. all the vague messages about how money changes people erased. But it was too late. Screenshots had already been shared, and the fact that she was scrambling to cover her tracks only made her look worse. Meanwhile, my parents were in full-blown panic mode. They had completely misjudged how people would react. They assumed that by painting me as the villain, the rest of the family would side with them. Instead, they were being called out from all directions. That's when the desperate calls began. One voicemail after another, pleading for me to settle. They claimed they never intended for things to escalate this far. They begged me to give them something, anything, to stop this from permanently damaging the family's reputation. I didn't reply. Then, Lucy tried changing her approach. She sent an email, insisting it had all been a misunderstanding. She blamed our parents, saying they were the ones who had pushed for the lawsuit and that she had no choice but to go along with it. She even hinted that if I agreed to a private settlement, she could convince them to drop the case. The same manipulative tactics they had used on me my entire life. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. A formal counter notice was sent. If they didn't withdraw the lawsuit immediately, we would file defamation charges within 48 hours. The case was dropped. And the best part, Lucy and my parents were now responsible for all legal fees. The lawsuit had backfired in the worst way possible. They thought they could intimidate me into paying them off, but instead they ended up in a bigger financial hole, one they had to deal with on their own. Then came the final message, an email from my parents. They claimed they had learned their lesson. The message was full of regret, reflecting on all the lost opportunities to be a better family. But buried beneath their words was the same unspoken expectation that an apology should be enough to undo everything. And of course, they also included a request for financial help. I responded with just 2 words, not happening. Then I blocked them for good. Weeks passed. For the first time in years, there was silence. No emails, no calls, no unexpected visits. I started to believe they had finally given up. Then another email landed in my inbox. It was from my parents. The subject line, "We finally understand." At first glance, the message seemed like an apology. They claimed to have realized their mistakes and wanted to make things right. They talked about how families should never have let things get this bad, how they regretted everything. For a second, it almost sounded sincere. Then the guilt tripping began. They begged me to come home. They said life was too short for grudges. They warned me that I would regret cutting them off. They tried to twist the situation, making it seem like I was the one being cruel for refusing to give family another chance. I ignored it. The next day, Lucy sent her own email. Hers was different, short, direct. She admitted that she had taken things too far, that she had made a mistake and wanted to make amends. She even acknowledged that she understood why I was angry. I ignored that one too. It was too sudden, too calculated. And I was right not to trust them because the very next day, everything exploded. My parents took the situation public. They posted a long, dramatic message on Facebook about how I had abandoned them. They wrote about how they had raised me, given me everything, and how, in their time of need, I had turned my back on them. Not a single word about the lawsuit. Not a mention of how they had tried to extort money from me. No acknowledgement of the lies they had spread or how they had ruined my reputation with extended family. They painted themselves as victims. And Lucy? She was back to posting her cryptic messages about family betrayal. They wanted sympathy. They wanted strangers to take their side. But it completely backfired. This time, people spoke up. Mutual friends, former classmates, even distant relatives who had stayed neutral before. People called them out. The lawsuit wasn't a secret. Everyone knew what had happened. And now, the same people who had once defended my family were turning against them. Lucy's financial situation wasn't exactly hidden either. Rumors spread about how she was broke, how she had lost most of her social circle, how her failed business ventures had turned her into a laughingstock. People started putting the pieces together. And suddenly, the sympathy my family had been hoping for wasn't there. Then came their final act of desperation. Lucy sent me one last message. It was a threat. If you don't help us, she wrote, we'll release private information about your past. It was meant to scare me. It didn't. I replied with just one sentence, do it. See how that works out for you. Nothing happened because there was nothing to expose. Just another lie, another desperate attempt to regain control over me. So I expanded the block list. I blocked Lucy. I blocked my parents. I blocked every single person still trying to guilt trip me. And that was it. I moved on, and I thrived. Months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Lucy had been forced to move back in with our parents. They were all struggling. Meanwhile, I had never been better, and I never looked back. For months, with my family cut off and no way to reach me, my life finally felt normal. No drama, no guilt trips, no sudden pleas for financial help. For the first time in years, I was completely free from their nonsense. Until I got a call from my bank. They had flagged suspicious activity on my account. Multiple failed login attempts, an unauthorized attempt to change my password. The representative on the phone sounded concerned, asking if I had recently tried to access my account from an unfamiliar location. I hadn't. Then they said something that made my stomach drop. Someone had correctly answered my old security questions. Not just any security questions, personal ones. The name of my first pet, the street I grew up on, my mother's maiden name. Only one group of people could have possibly known those answers. I immediately told the bank to freeze my accounts. Within minutes, I was locked out of everything. Credit cards, savings, even the emergency fund I had spent years building. I spent the next hour updating every password, changing security questions, and enabling two-factor authentication on all my accounts. Then I contacted my lawyer. The bank took the fraud attempt seriously and immediately launched an investigation into the unauthorized login attempts. A few weeks later, they got back to me with troubling news. The access attempt had come from a familiar location, my parents' home. This was no longer just emotional manipulation or legal threats. They had actually tried to steal from me. I sent a brief message to my parents. I know what you did. You have 24 hours to return any stolen money or I'm pressing charges. Their denial came almost immediately. They acted outraged, claimed they had no idea what I was referring to, and insisted that there must have been some mistake. Then, Lucy messaged me. She admitted that she had attempted to access my accounts, but according to her, it wasn't theft. No, she insisted she was simply checking my finances so she could help mom and dad. I told her exactly what it was, fraud, and I assured her there would be consequences. That's when I filed the police report. The bank had already flagged the fraudulent activity, and with the IP trace confirming the source, it officially became a criminal matter. The investigation was launched immediately. And my parents, they lost their minds. They began calling, pleading for me to let it go. Message after message flooded in. Excuses, sob stories about how this would destroy the family. Then they shifted tactics. They went back to Facebook. They posted a long, dramatic rant about how I was trying to have my own family arrested over a simple misunderstanding. They framed themselves as the victims. But this time, it didn't work. By now, the extended family knew the truth. Many had already distanced themselves after the lawsuit debacle. And now that actual fraud was involved, even the few who had originally defended my parents were disgusted. People called them out. Some relatives publicly asked why they had tried to access my bank account in the first place. So others outright told them to take responsibility for their actions. Then, the inevitable happened. Lucy was brought in for questioning. The police didn't waste time. With the bank's full cooperation and undeniable digital evidence, Lucy was taken in. The golden child, the one who had been handed everything her entire life, was finally facing real consequences. The moment Lucy was questioned, my family spiraled into full-blown panic. My parents immediately began their damage control, desperately trying to convince anyone who would listen that this was all a mistake. Their first excuse? Someone must have framed her. They claimed an outsider must have used their Wi-Fi to access my accounts, insisting Lucy had nothing to do with it. That excuse didn't hold up for long. The bank records didn't lie. The police had concrete digital evidence tying Lucy directly to the fraud attempt. When confronted, her explanation was laughable. She claimed she was just checking my finances to see if I actually had money, because she wanted to borrow some. That's right, she attempted to hack into my bank account because she wanted to see if I could afford to bail her out. And somehow, in her mind, that wasn't a crime. Despite my parents' desperate pleas, the authorities refused to let it go. That's when my parents made a last-ditch effort. Through a mutual connection, they sent a message offering me money from Lucy's failed business if I agreed to drop the charges. It was almost comical. They were so desperate that they were willing to hand over what little they had left just to protect Lucy. I responded with one sentence. You had no problem trying to steal from me. Now deal with the consequences. Then Lucy's real betrayal came to light. A cousin reached out with something I hadn't known before. For months, Lucy had been talking behind my back, telling people I was selfish, greedy, and heartless, all while secretly planning to steal from me. Not only had she tried to break into my accounts, but she had also been playing the victim the entire time. Then, my mother had her final public meltdown. She posted a long, dramatic Facebook rant about how no child should ever turn against their family. She went on about how I had abandoned them, how Lucy didn't deserve this, and how I was being cruel for letting my own sister suffer. But this time it backfired. For the first time, extended family members called her out. They told her outright that she was wrong, because no matter what, theft was inexcusable. And Lucy? She started losing everything. Her friends distanced themselves. Her business partners cut ties. Her name became toxic. And my parents, realizing they were out of options, came up with one last excuse. They started telling people that Lucy was mentally unwell, that she had been struggling for a long time, that she wasn't in the right state of mind when she did what she did. They wanted sympathy. They didn't get it. Because at the end of the day, the law didn't care. Lucy was officially charged with attempted fraud. My parents sent one final message. They begged me one last time to let it go. They insisted this would ruin Lucy's life. I sent Lucy one last text. You ruined your own life the moment you tried to steal from me. We're done forever. Then I blocked them all. The legal case against Lucy progressed quickly. With undeniable proof of attempted fraud, she had no real defense. The prosecution barely had to try. Bank records, IP logs, her own pathetic excuse of I was just checking to see if I could borrow money, it all sealed her fate. She was convicted and ordered to pay restitution for damages. But there was just one problem. Lucy didn't have the money, and so the financial downfall of my parents began. The legal fees alone had already drained them. But now they were responsible for covering what Lucy couldn't pay. Then one of the few cousins I still kept in contact with dropped a bombshell. My parents were on the verge of losing their house. Apparently, over the years, they had thrown everything into Lucy. Every spare dollar, every financial decision. All of it had gone into keeping her afloat because they truly believed she was destined for success. But she wasn't. And now, they had nothing left. Lucy had to move back in with them. Unemployed, disgraced, and now a convicted fraudster. Even the few relatives who had once supported them had begun to cut ties. No one wanted to be linked to a family that had attempted to con their own relatives. Meanwhile, I was experiencing the complete opposite. I was thriving. I had a steady job, great friends, and a life free from chaos. I had moved on from all the guilt, all the mind games, and all the manipulation. Then, out of nowhere, my parents made one final pitiful attempt. A handwritten letter appeared at my doorstep. They claimed they still loved me, that they wanted to make amends, that they regretted everything that had happened. I didn't even bother opening it. I tossed it straight into the fireplace and watched it burn. A year passed. Then, without warning, Lucy tried to reach out again. A message on LinkedIn. She wanted to talk. Blocked immediately. I didn't even read the entire message. By then, everyone knew the truth. My parents had lost most of their friends because of their deception and manipulation. Lucy's reputation was permanently ruined. No one wanted to work with her. No one wanted to be connected to her. And me? For the first time in my life, I had closure. No burdens, no obligations, no family expectations, just peace. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge. My wife and I were celebrating our first wedding anniversary with a vacation. But as I sat at the airport waiting for our return flight, she sent me a message that shattered everything. She told me she regretted marrying her second choice and that she couldn't continue pretending anymore. She asked me to return home alone because she couldn't keep up the facade. 2 weeks later, she called me sobbing after reading the notice I had left when I moved out. She definitely hadn't expected what came next. That anniversary trip had been my dream getaway. A luxurious beachfront resort, candlelit dinners, and uninterrupted time together. I had planned everything meticulously, down to the exact bottle of her favorite wine for a sunset toast. It felt like the perfect way to honor the year we had spent building our marriage. She seemed happy, or at least that's what I believed at the time. But in hindsight, there had been signs. Subtle ones. She wasn't quite herself during the trip. She was glued to her phone, brushed off my attempts to hold her hand on our walks, and spent more time staring out at the ocean than engaging in conversation with me. I had chalked it up to stress from work. She always told me I overanalyze things, so I convinced myself I was imagining the tension. Our final day together was quieter than I had expected. I had hoped for one last romantic dinner, but she suggested ordering room service instead. She barely ate and kept giving me strange glances as if she had something to say but couldn't bring herself to say it. I assumed she was planning a surprise, a gift maybe, or some heartfelt gesture to end our trip on a memorable note. At the airport, she suddenly excused herself to grab a coffee. I remained at the gate, idly scrolling through my phone, already dreading the return to everyday life. Then, my phone vibrated with a message from her. For a moment, I smiled, thinking she was just being playful, texting me from only a few steps away. Then I opened it, and my entire world fell apart. She wrote that she couldn't keep pretending anymore, that she regretted marrying me because I had never been her first choice. I had been the one she settled for. She said she was sorry, but that it wasn't fair to either of us to continue living a lie. She wasn't coming back with me. She told me to return home alone, saying we'd talk later when she was ready. My heart pounded, my breath caught in my throat, and the chaotic noise of the airport blurred into the background. Was this some kind of cruel joke? I frantically looked around, expecting to see her nearby, watching me, waiting to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But she was gone. I reread the message, hoping I had somehow misinterpreted it. I hadn't. The words were right there, cold and undeniable, slicing through me like a knife. My hands trembled as I dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. The woman I had pledged my life to had just abandoned me in an airport, without even having the decency to say it to my face. I sat there, staring blankly at my phone, waiting for her to call back, to text again, to say something that would make any of this make sense. Nothing. Passengers bustled around me, completely unaware of the wreckage inside my chest. Then my flight was called. Mechanically, I got to my feet, dragging my suitcase like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The flight attendant smiled as I boarded, but I barely managed to nod. The seatbelt felt like a noose as I sank into my seat by the window. Tears threatened to fall, but I clenched my jaw, refusing to let them win. I balled my hands into fists, my mind spinning with endless questions. How could she do this? Why now? Why after a year of marriage? And the one that cut the deepest? What did she mean by second option? The plane took off, and I stared blankly at the clouds as silent tears finally escaped down my face. I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, I withdrew into myself, drowning in a flood of memories. The way she had proposed to me, the laughter we shared on our honeymoon, the promises we made. Had it all been a lie? Had she been faking everything, every kiss, every smile, every whispered, I love you? Mid-flight, I broke. I unlocked my phone and typed a single message. Why? Why are you doing this? Her reply came almost instantly. Detached, emotionless. She said she was tired of pretending to be someone she wasn't. That she had tried to make our marriage work, but she couldn't force feelings that weren't there. She admitted she had married me because I was safe, reliable, and easy to please. But I wasn't the man she truly wanted. She thought she could grow to love me. She was wrong. My stomach twisted as I read her words. I felt humiliated, discarded, like I had been nothing more than a placeholder. Safe, reliable. That's all I had been to her. Fury burned through me as I typed back, "Who was your first choice? Did you cheat on me? Was this about someone else?" No response. By the time we landed, I felt hollow, empty. I didn't even try calling her again. I knew it would be pointless. She had made her decision. The woman I had trusted with my heart had crushed it without hesitation. I returned to an empty house that no longer felt like home. Every corner was a painful reminder of the life we had supposedly built together. Or rather, the life I had built while she went through the motions. Her shoes by the door. Her favorite coffee mug on the counter. The framed wedding photo on the mantle. The framed wedding photo on the mantle. All of them mocking me with their presence. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to smash every reminder of her existence. But I didn't. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring into nothing, allowing the weight of her betrayal to suffocate me. That night, I replayed her words over and over, trying to find some logic in what she had done. But no matter how many times I examined it, the truth remained the same. I had loved someone who never truly loved me, and now I was left to pick up the shattered remains of a life built on her deception. I had no idea what to do. Should I wait for her to come back? She had to return eventually, right? The silence in the house was unbearable. It wasn't the comforting quiet I had once cherished, the kind where I could hear the soft sounds of our life together. Now it was suffocating, a hollow echo of the betrayal that had destroyed everything I thought we had. I wandered from room to room like a ghost. Every piece of furniture, every framed picture on the wall taunted me with reminders of the life I had carefully built with her, a life she had abandoned so effortlessly. Her clothes still hung neatly in the closet. Her favorite watch rested on the nightstand. The bathroom still carried the faint scent of her perfume. I wanted to hate her, to despise the woman who had made a mockery of my love. But I felt nothing. I was drained, hollowed out. Days passed in a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. My body moved on autopilot while my mind looped through every conversation, every choice, every single moment we had shared. The same question tormented me. How could I have been so blind? The answer was just as painful as the question itself. I had loved her too much to see the truth. Or maybe deep down, I had chosen not to see it. By the third day, the haze of heartbreak began to clear, giving way to a slow burning anger. She had vanished, leaving me to pick up the wreckage alone. And worst of all, she had probably convinced herself that she was the victim of a loveless marriage. I refused to let her twist the narrative. I refused to drown in the ruins of a home that no longer felt like mine. So I made a plan. It took a full week to sort everything out. I packed my belongings, separating what was truly mine from the things we had bought together. The process felt strangely therapeutic, like reclaiming the pieces of myself I had given away too freely. Her things, I didn't touch them. Let her deal with the empty shelves and the emptiness where my presence used to be. I also arranged to terminate the lease. The house had been a rental, one we had chosen together in the early days of our marriage. It only felt right to leave it behind, to start fresh in a place that wasn't weighed down by her deceit. I contacted the landlord and set up the move-out notice to align with my departure. Finally, I sat down to write the letter. Every word felt like dragging a blade across my heart. But I had to say my piece. She needed to understand the damage she had done, not just to me, but to the person I had been before her. I started by telling her I was leaving, not just the house, but the marriage. I laid out the sacrifices I had made, the love I had poured into her, and the trust she had shattered with a single text message. I told her how filthy it felt to be discarded like an afterthought, to be labeled her second option, as if I had been nothing more than a consolation prize for her failed dreams. Then I addressed the man I suspected was her first choice. It didn't matter if he was real or just a ghost from her past. I wanted her to know that I had felt his presence in the shadows of our marriage. While she had been chasing an illusion, I had been building a life she had never deserved. And then came the final twist. She thought she had left on her terms, but I had already taken the first step. Enclosed with the letter were two official documents, one for our divorce and one for the house vacancy. The lease was up in a week. She would have to deal with the hassle of finding a new place and moving out. Where she went wasn't my concern anymore. I signed my name at the bottom, not just with anger or resentment, but with the quiet dignity she had tried to strip from me. I refused to be a man who sacrificed everything for a woman who never valued him. On my last day in that house, I left the letter on the kitchen counter, weighed down by the shattered pieces of her favorite coffee mug. A small poetic touch. It gave me more satisfaction than I had expected. I took one final look around. The house was nothing more than a hollow shell of the marriage I was leaving behind. I locked the door and walked away, without a second glance. Leaving that house felt like shedding a skin that no longer fit, but it didn't make the pain any less real. The first night in my tiny new apartment was unbearable. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the silence was far from comforting. It only amplified the chaos in my mind. I lay on a mattress from a discount store, staring at the ceiling, questioning whether I had made a mistake by walking away. Then I forced myself to sit up. For the first time, I saw things clearly. I didn't have to tiptoe around the ghosts of a failed marriage. I didn't have to wonder if my wife's distant stares meant she was thinking about him. This space, however small, however imperfect, was mine. And that was enough to begin again. The landlord was a kind man who owned a bakery. He had let me move in on short notice. At least I wasn't completely alone. Over the next few days, the grief hit like a tidal wave. No matter how much I tried to outrun it, it always found me. I sat by the window, tears slipping down my face, reliving the happy memories, and torturing myself with the same question. Why weren't they enough for her? I had to take time off work. I was too broken to function. My friends tried to rally around me, but I wasn't ready to face them yet. I didn't have much family, and I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth. The life they had envied, the loving wife, the beautiful home, the picture perfect anniversary trip had all been a lie. Their pity would have destroyed me. So I turned to the one person who understood my silence, my best friend Kelly. Kelly showed up the moment I needed her. I told him where I had moved. He arrived with arms full of groceries and enough wine to last a month. He didn't pry, didn't offer empty reassurances about time healing all wounds. Instead, he simply sat with me on the floor of my unfurnished living room, listening as I ranted, cried, and even laughed at the sheer absurdity of it all. He never left. He practically moved in with me. I no longer felt completely alone. Even my landlord would leave me cookies every day. It was during one of those wine-soaked evenings with Kelly that something became clear. She had shattered my sense of security, my ability to trust, even my self-worth for a while. But she hadn't taken me away from myself. Somewhere beneath the wreckage of our marriage, the ambitious, hopeful, and passionate version of me still remained. Exactly 2 weeks after I left, my phone rang. I had been expecting this. It wasn't a matter of if she would call, just when. Still, when her name flashed on my screen, my breath hitched. I froze, my hand hovering over my phone as my pulse pounded in my ears. I knew she still had access to the house. The landlord had told me that her belongings were still there. I let the call ring, unsure if I had the strength to hear her voice. Even after everything, she still had the power to shake me. Finally, I took a deep breath and swiped to answer, bracing myself for whatever was coming. The first thing I heard was her shaky breathing, the kind that comes when someone is barely holding back tears. It was so raw, so unfiltered that I knew she wasn't faking it. Then, when she finally spoke, her voice cracked with desperation, laced with a remorse I had never heard before. She told me she had returned to an empty house. She had seen my letter. She had found the legal notices. And for the first time, she truly understood that I was gone. She sounded stunned, as if it had never crossed her mind that I was capable of walking away. Then came the apologies, tumbling out in a frantic mess. She claimed she didn't know what had come over her, that she hadn't realized just how much she had taken me for granted, until it was too late. She told me she missed me, that the house felt cold and lifeless without me there, that she had been selfish, allowing her doubts and unresolved feelings to poison our marriage. I listened in silence, gripping my phone tighter as her words spilled out. She sounded like a woman on the edge. Her confidence shattered, her usual bravado nowhere to be found. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman I had imagined spending my future with. But then I remembered. I remembered the text she had sent. I remembered how casually she had discarded me at the airport, like an old suitcase she no longer wanted to carry, and any pity I might have felt vanished. She said she was willing to do whatever it took to fix things, that she couldn't bear the thought of losing me. Her voice cracked when she said my name, pleading for another chance. A lump formed in my throat, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the rage, the humiliation, the shame I felt for ever believing she was the one. I cut her off. My voice was steadier than I expected. I told her I had already filed for divorce. And as she had seen for herself, I was serious about it. There was silence on the line. Then her voice broke. She asked why I hadn't told her, why I hadn't called or texted her about this, why I hadn't given her a chance to prove she could be better. Her tone wasn't just remorseful, it was accusatory, as if I was the one who had given up too easily. I didn't hold back. I told her I had spent years giving her chances, that I had sacrificed my happiness over and over to sustain a marriage she had treated like an obligation. I reminded her that while I had been planning our future, she had been stuck in the past, chasing after some fantasy that never included me. Her apologies didn't undo the damage. Her tears didn't erase the words she had so easily sent in that text. Still, she kept pleading. She promised things would be different. She swore she would go to therapy, that she would do whatever it took to make me happy, that she hadn't realized how much I meant to her, until she came home to a house stripped of my presence, until she read my words, until she felt what it meant to lose me. The temptation to believe her, to hope, was there. But it wasn't enough to override what I had felt that day at the airport. I thought about the nights I had spent crying alone, the shame of being publicly discarded like I was nothing, the countless times I had compromised for a woman who had never once met me halfway. I asked her if she had any idea what it had been like for me, waiting at the airport, blindsided and humiliated. I told her she could have at least had the decency to tell me to my face. I yelled that none had to happen the way it did. Then I told her I was done. My voice was raw, and for the first time, she heard it. She felt it. She went silent, as if she hadn't expected me to be the one to walk away first. I told her that while I still wished her the best, not really, I had no interest in being part of her redemption arc. I didn't want to be the man who stayed, the man who forgave, the man who bent until he finally broke. I deserved better than that. A long pause stretched between us. Then, almost in a whisper, she asked if we could meet in person. She said she needed to see me, to properly explain herself, to prove how much she regretted everything. I hesitated. A part of me wanted to see her suffering, to witness the pain on her face and feel the satisfaction of knowing she finally understood what she had lost. But I knew if I saw her, she would pull me back in, and I was trying so hard to leave. So I told her I would think about it. But we both knew my answer was already no. I agreed to meet her, for legal matters only. When the call ended, I sat in my dim apartment staring at my phone. I had thought her regret would bring me closure, that hearing her beg for forgiveness would heal at least some of the wounds she had left behind. But instead, I felt nothing. Her guilt didn't erase what she had done. Her tears didn't lessen the pain she had caused. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I didn't need her for a happy ending, and I swore to myself I would never stop chasing one. Kelly remained my anchor, often dropping by unannounced with coffee or dragging me out for impromptu dinners. One night, while sharing a plate of nachos at our go-to diner, he looked at me and said, I seemed different, maybe even happier than before. It had been 2 months since I walked away. Then I received a message from her. My lawyer had been handling everything smoothly, and since there wasn't much to divide, the process was straightforward. I should have at least married rich if I had to deal with this much trauma. Crying on a cruise wouldn't have been so bad. That was her opening line. The message went on to say that she had accepted the divorce and was signing the papers. She thanked me for the time we had spent together, before and after marriage, and admitted that she had been wrong to take me for granted. She wished me happiness and said she hoped I'd find the love I truly deserved. I replied briefly, acknowledging her honesty and wishing her well. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was my way of moving forward. Days passed. Life continued. Then, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post that made my stomach twist. It was on her account. The man she had once chosen over me. She had tagged him in a photo, a blurry snapshot of them at a bar, with a caption that made my chest tighten. Some things are worth waiting for. For a moment, I just stared. Then I laughed. Not a bitter, resentful laugh, just pure, genuine amusement. After everything, after all her apologies and tears, she had gone back to him. The irony was almost poetic. This was her cycle, her way of filling the emptiness in her life with people she never truly valued. It had never really been about me or him. I closed the app and moved on. There were far more important things in life. 2 days after seeing that picture, my phone rang again. Her name flashed across the screen. For a second, I considered ignoring it. That chapter was closed. What more could she possibly have to say? Then I exhaled sharply. Might as well get this over with. Her voice trembled as soon as I picked up, as if she had spent hours working up the nerve to call. She started with small talk, asking how I was, but I could hear the hesitation in her tone, the way she struggled to sound casual when desperation seeped through every syllable. Then she got to the point. She wanted to talk about the divorce. She wasn't ready to give up on us. I let out a short, humorless laugh. I asked her what had changed, what had happened since her last message, the one where she had so graciously accepted the divorce. Her response came in a hurried rush, words stumbling over each other as she scrambled to explain. She claimed she had made a mistake in letting me go, that watching me leave had made her realize how much she needed me in her life. I cut her off. I told her it didn't seem like she meant that. She caught on instantly. She knew what I was referring to. The picture. The one of her and him. She quickly denied it, insisting it was nothing. Just a casual night out with an old friend. People were reading too much into it. Then came the same tired words. She still loved me. She couldn't picture a future without me. I let her talk. Let the silence stretch, allowing her own desperation to echo back at her. Her voice cracked as she begged me to reconsider. She swore she would go to therapy, do anything to fix things. She pleaded, saying she couldn't believe I had given up so easily. And that was my breaking point. Easily, I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. I told her if she really believed this was easy, then she had never been paying attention. I reminded her she didn't even have the decency to leave with respect. I told her to look at the damage she had caused. The years I had spent being her emotional punching bag. Her second choice. An afterthought. She tried to interrupt. I didn't let her. I told her guilt didn't erase the pain she had inflicted. That the humiliation of being left at an airport because she lacked the courage to be honest was something I would never forget. I told her that no amount of tears could undo that text message, the one that had ripped apart my trust and made me question my own worth. She started apologizing again. I didn't care. I told her I had seen the photo with him and that it only confirmed what I had already known about her. She couldn't be alone. She was so desperate for validation that she latched onto anyone willing to give it. Her voice rose, defensive now. She insisted the picture was misunderstood, that I was overreacting, that she didn't love him, that she had only reached out because she was lonely. A laugh slipped from my lips before I could stop it. She had just proven my point. I told her loneliness was no longer my problem. If she had put half as much effort into our marriage as she was now into begging me back, we wouldn't be in this mess. That's when she broke. I heard it in her voice as she started to sob. She begged me. She said she couldn't bear the idea of losing me, that she didn't know how to move on. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. Then I said the words I knew would crush what little was left of her pride. I told her I wasn't the one who needed to move on. She was. I told her I had already begun building a life, one that didn't revolve around her moods or insecurities, one where I wasn't constantly trying to prove my worth to someone who never truly saw it. Then, the final blow. I told her that I didn't miss her, not even a little, and that the only thing I ever regretted was marrying her in the first place. I could almost hear the sound of her pride crumbling the moment her heart finally broke. I hadn't set out to be cruel, but listening to her just filled me with frustration. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, soft, almost childlike. She asked if there was anything she could do to change my mind. I told her the only thing she needed to do was show up in 6 months to finalize the divorce. Until then, I didn't want to hear from her, didn't want to see her, didn't even want to think about her. I made it clear that this wasn't up for discussion. There was nothing left to salvage. She started to protest, but I shut her down. I told her I had spent enough of my time and energy on someone who only realized my worth when it was too late. I told her I deserved better, and I would never settle for less again. Then, before she could get another word in, I ended the call. 6 months later, I would see her again, but it would be on my terms. A notification popped up on my phone. It was him, the same guy from the picture, the one who had smugly leaned into her while she grinned without a shred of shame. My stomach twisted as I stared at his name. What could he possibly want? I didn't open the message right away. I knew engaging with him would do nothing but pull me back into a mess I had no interest in revisiting. But there it was, sitting there, a glaring reminder of the chaos my ex had left in her wake. Later that night, after arguing with myself, I gave in. I opened the message and skimmed through it quickly. He started by introducing himself, as if I didn't already know who he was. Then he slipped into a tone that felt oddly familiar, polite, almost too casual. He said he hoped I wouldn't take his message the wrong way, but felt it was time to clear the air. He knew about the divorce and wanted to assure me that he had nothing to do with it. He claimed they had only reconnected after my ex had told him we were separating. He made a point of emphasizing that they were just friends now, that he hoped I could understand, that there were no bad intentions on his part. Did he expect me to thank him for his generosity? Then, as if he hadn't already crossed enough lines, he actually offered to talk. He said that if I ever wanted clarity, he'd be happy to explain things further. Clarify what exactly? My ex had already made her choices clear the moment she walked away from me at the airport. She might not have been the only reason our marriage collapsed, but she was still the reason. That didn't mean I owed this guy a conversation or forgiveness. I thought about replying, then I stopped myself. Giving him a response would be giving him exactly what he wanted: attention, validation, control. And I refused to give him any of that. Instead, I deleted the message. Then I blocked him. My silence was my answer. The next day, I casually mentioned it to Kelly. He rolled his eyes so dramatically I thought they might get stuck. He told me my ex's new boyfriend reaching out was nothing more than a pathetic attempt to clear his conscience, or worse, to stir up drama. Kelly reminded me that silence was the most powerful response I could give. And I knew he was right. So I let it go. I had wasted enough of my life on people who thrived on conflict and attention. The best thing I could do now? Keep moving forward. Leave them exactly where they belonged. In the past,